Katerina Jaka watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jaka saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for March 11th, 2021. Tonight we have, I think, what's a lineup that's you'll find very interesting. Rainer, I'm sure you'll agree. My name is Chris Driscoll, by the way, and along with me is Rainer Shea. Hello, Rainer. How are you?
Hello. I just watched Charlie Chaplin's speech from The Great Dictator, where he was playing the role as as
that was great.
In context, he was this random disoriented man who looked exactly like Adenoid Hinkle, the dictator, and he aired his candid sentiments about the world, about humanity, and his sentiments were so beautiful, saying how dictators will die and greed will pass, and the tyranny that we see now will pass. And this is what I'm going to touch upon in discussing one of my articles, particularly the article about how neoliberalism's end goals are dictatorship and mass extermination. All of this is a reaction to the passing of greed.
Yeah, I had never seen that movie up until about 1.5 years ago, and I discovered that there's one Chaplin movie I've never seen. That's it. So I thought, oh my God, I've got to correct that. And I did. I got a hold of a stream for it and watched it. It was stupendous. Chaplin BTW was a communist, Marxist-Leninist, as well as being the most brilliant comedian in the first half of the 20th century, really into the second half as well, because I don't think he died until the mid-60s. I'm not going to name a date because I'm sure I'll be wrong, but it was in the mid-60s when he died. And of course, his I think 2 of his daughters are great actresses today. still in movies. Yeah, he was a wonderful person. He was driven out of the United States, the place that he had adopted as home when he had to move here to make movies in Hollywood in the 1920s. And yeah, he was driven out by McCarthy, the McCarthyites, the evil ones, the evildoers, the fascists, in other words. Don't think that fascism is something new in America. It's not. Fascism's been rearing its ugly head for a long time. And Charlie Chaplin's just one more example of one of the victims of that, but also one of the great fighters against fascism. So yeah, really brilliant. Okay, let's launch right into the first topic tonight, which is the COVID relief bill is passed by Congress. But who pays for it? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. I mean, there's scads. So you just look on, Google News and you'll see scads of articles about it. That's what the bourgeois media, the billionaire-owned news media, is talking about right now. So apparently it's what they, the billionaire class, want us to be talking about. And it is, I mean, there are people, I know lots of working class people who are really counting on this extra tax-free $1,400. So, there is something for the working class in this, a bone, so to speak, thrown off the dinner table of the ruling class. Meanwhile, a lot more of this bill, I think it's almost a $2 trillion bill. A lot more of it is going to the billionaire class. Go figure. What a surprise. The people who absolutely don't need any of this, many of them have become much greater, more rich, greater billionaires through exploitation of the COVID plague. And of course, pedophile Joe Biden is beholden to that class because they are the ones who put him in power. So he's done them another huge favor, just like Donald Trump did earlier on. He's giving them more trillions, and he's throwing some crumbs down to the working class by way of some extra unemployment benefits and some these $1,400 checks. Biden, remember, promised that it would be $2,000 checks. So he's once again stiffing us out of $600 that he promised us earlier. Anyway, my question is, who pays for it? Because from the looks of it, from what I can tell so far, it's going to be just like all the past two COVID relief bills, in that the working class will pay the most, the poor will pay, the middle class will pay greatly, at least the lower tiers of the middle class, not so much the higher tiers of the middle class. We're the ones who will pay. In other words, like 90% of us, because those categories I just named add up to about 90% of us. And about 90% of us will pay for this COVID bill, just like we paid for the other two COVID bills, just like we pay for everything the government does in America. For all its wars, for everything else, we pay. So, that's the point there. This is really robbing a little from Peter to give a great deal to Paul. That's what this amounts to. You've heard the old saying, robbing from Peter to give to Paul, because they were two early Christian apostles who supposedly worked together. We're supposed to work together. So, although from what I hear, they didn't work too well together. Anyway, this is the COVID relief bill. I think every American, at least all the 90% of us who I just mentioned, should be out there protesting this bill, not, demanding that it be withdrawn or something. It's already done. I don't know if pedophile Joe has signed it yet, but it's been passed. So all it needs is Joe's signature. And since Joe proposed the legislation, I'm pretty sure he's going to give the signature. They're saying the checks are, the IRS is ready to send the checks out immediately, blah, blah, blah. So who pays for it? I think it's time we need a tax rebellion in America to turn this shit around. We need a tax protest of massive proportions to start making those who benefit from all this pay the overwhelming majority of the costs of it. That's what I think. What do you think, Rainer?
From what I understand, there's also the factor of the Federal Reserve continuing on its increasingly accelerating path of just printing more money. Apparently in this last year, something like around 50%, 40 or so percent of all the money printed in US history has been printed since the start of the pandemic, which I think really speaks to the level of the reaction that the US ruling class financial technocrats are engaging in amid this really unprecedented situation, because the billionaires, the very richest, may be seeing their livelihoods get better. They may be seeing themselves get even wealthier, but there's been this vast decrease in GDP that's not really been recovered from too much since that crazy second quarter of last year, where something like a third of the GDP was went into decline. And there's this continuation of the overall decades-long trend we've discussed, where there's this declining rate of profits. And this is reflected in the massive losses of small businesses, the job losses for tens of millions of people. These are huge chunks out of the productive capacity of the US economy, with so much of this wealth getting siphoned up, consolidated into big tech, into the coffers of the billionaire class. And when the US economy becomes this top heavy, something has to give. It really seems like at some point soon, as we've discussed again in past episodes, there's going to be a financial crash, perhaps even worse than the one from 2008. And this is the staggering nature of the crisis that we've entered into in this last year. I remember over a year ago, at the beginning of 2020, we were speculating about when the long anticipated next great economic crash would happen. And we, of course, couldn't have foreseen that just a couple of months later, COVID-19 would throw this huge curveball, this huge shock into the system. And this has correlated in certain ways with the financial crisis that the US has been experiencing actually before COVID-19 started, or seemingly around the fall of 2019. But there's going to be this additional stage of the crisis where the entire economy, which has become subprimed, is going to fall. It's going to collapse in a more severe way than in 2008. And we'll see how much of a Band-Aid this stimulus provides.
Yeah, I believe we're already in a worse economic crisis than in 2008. Although this is actually a continuation, it's all the same problems that they never even bothered to try to solve in 2008 that we are dealing with now. It's just a double dip of the same shit, really. And it's going to get a lot worse. That's my prediction. Anyway, let's see. Topic number 2, Tulsi Gabbard. You remember her? She used to be a congresswoman in Hawaii. She calls out the U.S. dirty war on Syria that Biden and his aides admit to. And this was brought to my attention from Pushback with Aaron Maté, which is on the Gray Zone. You can look at the GrayZone.com to find the episode with Aaron Maté, and within that there is the Tulsi Gabbard video where she's calling out Biden on his recent attack on Syria, the bombing, latest bombing of Syria. Now, what I would like to do, if you'll indulge, okay, so I'm going to share with you this short video by Tulsi Gabbard, the former congresswoman from Hawaii, talking about her former colleagues in the Congress and Joe Biden.
I am glad to hear that some of my former colleagues in Congress are speaking out against the recent unconstitutional airstrikes in Syria. But they're ignoring the bigger issue. The regime change war the United States continues to wage in Syria using Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, HTS terrorists as our proxy ground force, and who now occupy and control the city of Idlib, imposing Sharia law and cleansing the area of most Christians and religious minorities. The Biden administration continues to use our military to illegally occupy northeastern Syria to, quote, take the oil, as Trump so crassly but honestly put it, violating international law. Now, modern day siege of draconian embargo and sanctions, similar to what the Saudi-US alliance employed in Yemen, is causing death and suffering for millions of innocent Syrians, depriving them of things like food, medicine, clean water, energy, warmth, and making it impossible for the Syrian people to try to begin to rebuild their war-torn country.
You're off. Turn yourself back on. Turn it back on.
Start over. Okay, there you have it. Tulsi Gabbard's brilliant comments. I mean, to the point and extremely truthful to the detriment of the Joe Biden regime. And I was just blown away when I saw that. Apparently, Aaron Maté was as well from the Gray Zone. Yeah, people should go to thegrayzone.com and check out that the latest episode of Pushback with Aaron Maté, and that will tell you a lot more than I'm going to do right now. I'm trying to be brief. So, Rainer, what were your thoughts on that?
It's something that has been a real dissonance for the U.S. political and media establishment, especially since 9/11, the situation where Washington actively helps terrorist groups impose the same kinds of tyranny that's so paranoidly fear-mongered about by reactionaries within the U.S. These reactionaries, the political system they support is reinforcing, is actively helping expand the Sharia law, the brutal tyranny that Al Qaeda imposes on the communities that it occupies. And it appears that this is going to be indefinite. Washington is going to try to keep this up forever. It appears that northeastern Syria is going to continue to be the extent to which Washington can achieve regime change in Syria, because years ago it became apparent that the US isn't going to be able to overthrow Assad. Years ago it became clear that Assad was going to win the war. So now all that Washington can do is use its Islamic jihadist proxies to occupy certain parts of Syria and to outright steal Syria's resources, and also utilize the ongoing anti-Assad propaganda campaign to help reinforce imperialist ideological hegemony within the core of the empire and keep the masses within the US from gaining revolutionary consciousness.
Yeah, and Aaron Maté, a couple of things I will point out, things that Aaron Maté pointed out. Number one, this enclave in Idlib, in the Idlib province of Syria, that is harboring Al Qaeda and ISIS and all kinds of nefarious jihadi fascistic terrorists. It is now the largest concentration of jihadi terrorists that the world's seen since Afghanistan in prior to the U.S. And NATO invasion of Afghanistan. And it was totally enabled by the Biden regime, the Trump regime, and now by the Biden regime, and was begun by the Obama regime. I'm sorry. And the other thing that Aaron Maté points out, he has a list of different comments by Obama regime officials and Biden regime officials that show very clearly that they know that they are enabling, that they are funding and directing and arming and jihadi terrorists, this Al Qaeda for fuck's sake. They know that, and they talk about it. And he has different quotes. I mean, hell, even in 2014, even Biden talked about how U.S. allies in the region, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in particular, were funding these organizations, and they were getting the guns from the United States, the weapons, the weapons of mass destruction that they were giving to these terrorists. The United States has known this for a long time. They've done it deliberately for a long time. And there's even a quote by the person who was in charge of this stuff back in the Obama regime, saying why they did this. They did it because they thought that an ISIS regime would be preferable to the Assad government. And they did it deliberately. They used these terrorists as proxies for that purpose, for that reason, to try to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. Now, why do they not like Bashar al-Assad? Well, main thing is because of his political party, the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party, which is a form of socialism, and they don't like any form of socialism. They don't like it when workers and their families get free housing, get subsidized gasoline for their cars, get free education, womb to tomb, no matter where they want to go in the whole country, as people used to get in Syria. Syria, hell, Damascus used to be called the Paris of the Middle East. You know, it was a beautiful place to live, and people were happy there until Obama started his war, his proxy war against Syria, starting in 2011, I think. And it's been going downhill ever since. And there's no way around it for the Bashar Assad government, given what the American imperialists and their allies in Europe are doing to Syria, to destroy the Syrian economy with their onerous sanctions. We could just go on and on about this, but it's getting late, so let's move on. The next topic comes to us from Rainer Shea. Dictatorship and mass extermination are the neoliberal endgames.
I've found some theory that comes from the seemingly furthest right end of the libertarian intelligentsia, which is represented in I think his name is his last name is Hop, and he wrote this book, 2001 book, Democracy, the God That Failed, where he argues that democracy is actually tyrannical because it allows for the broad masses to exercise control over those in control of private enterprise, and therefore democracy needs to be forsaken in favor of what he calls a private capital, or he called it private law, where corporations are able to operate totally independently of any government oversight, where there's no government. And that's what anarcho-capitalism is. He's one of the anarcho-capitalist theorists, and he also wrote some pretty alarming diagnoses for how to set up this hypothetical ultra-libertarian society, where he recommended the physical removal of homosexuals, of people who engage in hedonism, of anybody who does not fit into this fascistic utopian vision that he has. He's in the same vein as the Chicago Boys, as people like Milton Friedman, this class of libertarian neoliberal academics who helped lend perceived ideological legitimacy to the Pinochet regime, this murderous dictatorship that pioneered neoliberalism before neoliberalism was exported to pretty much everywhere. And now we see this dystopic vision coming to increasingly resemble our world, coming to increasingly resemble the territories where the imperialists are still in control. One example of this I use in my article, in addition to all the other human rights abuses and exacerbations of inequality, all these manifestations of social murder that are being proliferated throughout the globe. One example I use in my article is the move that the Ecuadorian government is making to privatize its central bank, to free up its bank from any kind of government oversight and to institutionalize the inequalities that have been tormenting Ecuador's people in this last year throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Ecuador's government wants to carry out this corporate coup in anticipation of the very likely election of an anti-IMF candidate, which is probably going to happen next month. The neoliberal government there is so unpopular that it's circling the drain. It's about to have its ideology voted out, but they hope to undemocratically, unconstitutionally preserve corporate rule within Ecuador by totally freeing up the central bank there from any kind of government oversight. And I think that this is Hobbes' vision for anarcho-capitalism come closer to realization. And it's notable how the factor that is provoking this move towards anarcho-capitalism in Ecuador is the manifestation of democracy, the confrontation with democracy that Ecuador's ruling class and the Washington imperialists are confronted with, where the masses are deciding to vote in an anti-IMF candidate, and the imperialists and the ruling class in Ecuador want to respond by institutionalizing corporate tyranny and freeing up the bank from government oversight.
Yeah, this Hobbes guy sounds like a pretty nasty piece of work. Ecuador, yeah, I think it's now a sure thing. Barring an atomic bomb dropping on Ecuador, that the Ecuadorian people are going to elect a far left anti-imperialist social democrat in the coming weeks. So yeah, this is exactly what these neoliberal agenda is all about. That's their end game. Well put. Okay, next on our list, a look at China's democracy, rule of law at the two sessions. Now, you'll recall that I've talked about this, the two great legislative bodies of China that meet once a year. A subset of those legislatures meet on a regular basis, but they meet once a year. And they're meeting right now, and there's been some really interesting stuff out, and I just want to show a short video explaining some of this. I hope I can find it now. Let me make sure that I get it right up where I need it so that I can there we go. That way it should come up. Okay, now I'm just going to share this thing with you all. If I can, here it is. Okay, this video was done by Mario Cavolu, I think his name is pronounced, an Italian-American writer and commentator who's lived in China for a long time. So let me just launch right into it.
Well, when you look at the composition of the Chinese legislature, people come from all walks of life, all different provinces all over China. Some come from the Nongchuan, countryside, some come from the cities. One of the great misunderstandings is that, oh, China's not a democracy. No, China's not a two-party system, but there are many democratic aspects and processes in China's constitution, in China's law, and in the way that the legislature governs. They have very specific ways, via surveys, for example, at the local level, to solicit, to survey the citizens and ask, what do you need? What do you want? What are you happy about? They assess at the local level, at the municipal level, at the provincial level, and all of that information that they get from the they ask the citizens, to say it in a simple way. They don't form policy by deciding what the billionaires need. They form policy by figuring out, finding out from the citizens what they need, what the society needs. They form the policy, and that's the root of what these 5-year plans are. Some suggest, because it's a one-party system, that all of these things that are happening in Beijing are just rubber-stamped. And again, this is a terrible misunderstanding and a distortion of what's really going on. Because the 2 sessions, the actual execution at this the final level here, where we are this week, of executing what is the 5-year plan, is something that actually began. The process began a long time ago. It's a rigorous and complex process that starts at the local level, finding out and what the government's officials' responsibility are at the local level, at the municipal level, at the provincial level. And that information and the policies that get formed, the priorities that get formed within the plan, that is a process that slowly boils upward. And then you finally have the big duin, the big finished stew, which contains all of those ingredients. And at the end, this needs to be ratified, certified, and executed. In that sense, we could say it gets rubber stamped, but we mean it in a good way. It gets approved. And then the best part, of course, is that China's so good at going ahead and doing it, getting it done. The obvious and distinct difference between Western democracy and the sense of democracy in the Chinese government system, and it's there. So many people don't understand that or don't want to let themselves understand and believe that, but it's there. However, they get hung up on the obvious, which is that, oh, it's a one-party system, therefore there's no democracy, and that's simply untrue. I have to say, the Chinese government is doing a superb job of taking care of the entire society. Look at the recent achievement in terms of the poverty alleviation, for example. In the West, there was a shift, and the shift is unfortunate because the democratic process, the system, regardless of the fact that it's a two-party system, because both parties are doing it, are really to the point where they've allowed the government to serve primarily the wealthy class and the corporate class, and even the military, not the rest of society. And that is the root of the problems that we see in the West.
Make sure you're not
Okay.
muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm unmuted. So that was from Mario Cavolo. I thought it was a really good brief explanation, far better than I could give, really, of the system. And there are a couple things he said I could quibble with, mainly having to do with the idea that America is or ever has been a democracy. But that's what they continuously call it. They call it the democracy, the Western democracies. The Western democracies are all plutocracies. They're all, and they always have been, because that's the way the capitalist state is set up. They're all there to serve the billionaire class, the wealthy, the ultra wealthy, who have more power even than the less wealthy, but still tremendously wealthy. So China's not that way. China's a real democracy, and it works quite well. The proof is in the pudding. All the polls, even polls done by like Gallup poll, American right-wing American pollsters show that the Chinese people overwhelmingly support their government, support the Communist Party of China that administers that government, and they support their state because it's their state. It is really their state. It is a state that's called a workers and peasants state for a reason, because the workers and the farmers of China are in the driver's seat, and you can see in what Mario Cavolo was saying that that's absolutely true. So, Rainer, what are your thoughts on that?
I keep coming back to this incredible fact that in the last year, China has been pretty much the only country that's experienced a rise in its living standards, as opposed to pretty much the entire rest of the world, which has had around 150 million people get driven into poverty due to these compounding crises of capitalism. Just a few months ago, China was able to officially announce, after thorough inspections, that it had gotten rid of absolute poverty within the entire country, and these Western headlines can quibble with that assertion. They can try to poke holes in it, try to claim that China is being hypocritical, or that it's changing the definitions. But even if that were true, which it's not, it's a bunch of BS. These Western democracies have been experiencing a rapid increase in democracy, as opposed to the quantifiable. I mean, what did I say? Democracy? I meant poverty. They've been experiencing a rise in poverty, as opposed to the quantifiable rise in living standards that China has experienced. And as for democracy in the West, it really seems like democracy has been getting less substantial within these Western countries in this last year.
Yeah, there are still poor people in many millions of poor people in China. And to many Americans, especially middle-class Americans, who would see that, they would seem pretty poor. But to them, they feel greatly richer than they were, because when they used to have capitalism back before 1949, they lived a subsistence level on a couple of dollars a week. So it's they live greatly better than they did then. And there's a huge portion of China who live basically what you would call working class or middle class standards, Western middle class standards. So yeah, they've come a long way in an extremely short time, shorter than any capitalist nation has ever accomplished this same rise in social, political, industrial, cultural development. So it's really a great accomplishment. And I urge people, don't just listen to the propagandists from the CIA and the State Department and all their mouthpieces like the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. Don't just listen to that. Go to other sources, independent sources, and look at China's real democracy. And look at how it works, and you'll see that you've been being lied to over and over and over again in this CIA State Department propaganda. Next on the list, Rainer Shea says, the capitalist state looks strong, but it's sowing its own doom.
This comes back to what I pointed out earlier about how the U.S. economy has been becoming a lot more top down in this last year, especially as inequality has risen, as U.S. billionaires have collectively gotten over $1 trillion richer, while tens of millions have now become out of a job. And the same applies, I think, to the tools that the capitalist class in the US uses to maintain the current social order. Because in these last 15 years, it's really seemed like neoliberalism, the ideology of the ruling class, has lost perceived credibility among the masses. The 2008 economic crash, whose effects have been ongoing throughout this last decade or so, since the recession supposedly ended, people have continued to suffer since 2008, and they've been suffering exponentially more in this last year. And this has caused neoliberalism to lose its perceived credibility within the culture. So increasingly, the capitalist class relies upon the armed forces to this labor or aristocracy that are given guns and a higher pay grade to try to enforce the current social order. And the logical conclusion of this trend where the masses become progressively less on board with capitalism and imperialism, will the police and the military become increasingly relied upon to enforce the current social order. The logical conclusion of this trend is a situation that very much resembles what's happened in all of the current socialist states, and also in the original socialist state, the Soviet Union. The logical conclusion of this is a scenario where the bourgeoisie needs to use their mercenaries, their armed vigilantes, their police personnel, their military personnel, to try to beat back against a domestic class revolt. At that point, it'll be a question of which side has the best military capabilities, and I don't think that the working class movement in the United States has hopes of militarily surpassing the capitalist state in terms of military hardware, and perhaps in terms of the numbers of its army. Let's just be real. But this is where the art of war comes in. This is where tactical intelligence comes in, because even though we can't hope to match the capitalist state in terms of military and technological proficiency in arms, we can hope to utilize the strength in numbers that we have. This is where it comes to what you've pointed out, this link you sent me this week about the Cuban Revolution and the strike that was what was the defining factor in overthrowing the capitalist state within Cuba. It wasn't just the guerrilla warfare in Cuba, though this was obviously necessary to protect the lives of the revolutionary vanguard over there. It was also the masses coordinating with the Marxist-Leninists and kind of becoming Marxist-Leninists by default through participating in these strike actions. Hopefully, this is what we'll be able to replicate within the United States in the coming decades.
Yeah, I'm going to read that book too. I have it on my short list here. I decided to send it to you because I thought you'd probably get something out of it. But even Fidel Castro had said when he was alive that the role of the working class in the struggle was tremendous, and it really has been overlooked. You know, and it's obvious the reason the guerrillas were the romantic side of the revolution in Cuba. They were the side that you could make movies about, and there have been plenty of movies. I've seen several of them made about the guerrilla struggle in Cuba, led by Fidel Castro and Raul Castro and Che Guevara. It was the side that you can make movies out of. You know, it's a lot harder to get people to go watch a movie about a strike and about the day-to-day hard trudge of organizing the working class and what the working class do to free themselves and to liberate themselves. But really, as Fidel points out, that's extremely important. And it's a side that people need to start writing about. And this particular person, a guy from England, did write about it. So anyway, the next point on the list here, splashing $10 million a year to split and subvert China. U.S. government-backed foundation unabashedly reveals its funding scheme. And this is an article that comes from Global Times, the Chinese daily, Chinese Communist Party daily tabloid newspaper that the working class reads in tremendous numbers that the Washington Post and the New York Times would really envy if they knew about them, and I'm sure they don't. Anyway, just a little bit from the article. It says the National Endowment for Democracy, and just an aside here, we've talked about this NED, National Endowment for Democracy, plenty of times on this show in the past. It's a really nefarious outfit. Anyway, they say the National Endowment for Democracy, a veteran anti-China foundation financed by the U.S. government, has been discovered to have spent more than $10 million to fund secessionist organizations and subversive activities in China in 2020. Talk about meddling, huh? I mean, these idiot Democrats rave about Russia meddling in American affairs, which is a lie. But America does this all over the world to different countries, including China, as this article points out. In the financial statements published on NED's website in February, at least 69 programs and activities related to secessionists and anti-China forces received grants in the past year, maliciously interfering in China's internal affairs, using pretexts like human rights and religious freedom. NED is notorious for propagating anti-China propaganda and meddling in other countries' internal affairs. Funding for this self-proclaimed private nonprofit organization, which largely comes from the U.S. Congress, has long been funneled to secessionists in China's Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan regions, observers have found. Alan Weinstein, the co-founder of NED, told the Washington Post back in 1991 that a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. So that's what this outfit is really all about. It's really just an adjunct to the CIA. The foundation, once behind some covert operations in Eastern Europe in the 1980s and 90s, now plays a major role in the infiltration and penetration of US-sponsored hostile Western forces into China, said Chao Wei, an expert on security studies at Lanshu University. So there you have it, Rainer. What are your thoughts?
There's been evidence that's been coming out in these last few months, largely revealed by the gray zone. We've discussed it about how US, UK governments, in collaboration with news outlets like what are the news outlets? I'm blanking, but
Reuters.
Bellingcat.
It's
Bellingcat.
Yeah, it's Reuters. The two the British ones were Reuters and the BBC.
These outlets have been working to spread basically pro-US propaganda within these targeted countries, mainly Russia, and it's this propaganda has been pro-US by default because this propaganda has sought to sow anti-Putin sentiment among the Russian populace, and obviously Putin is not somebody that any communist should support because he's an anti-communist. He's bourgeois, but what these governments want is very obviously the reinstatement of somebody like Boris Yeltsin within Russia, a complicit, compliant, probably buffoonish leader who will follow all of the demands of Washington and allow Russia to be totally looted without any restriction by the imperialists. And this is the situation that the imperialists have been trying to bring back within Russia in the last 20 years, and it's shown why Putin has had such a huge amount of support from the Russian people, in spite of him not sharing their wishes to return to socialism. Putin has provided them with improving standards of living, relatively improved, despite the innate depression that capitalism causes. And Washington wants to make the situation in Russia even worse, revert it to some kind of fascist dystopia, potentially led by this Navalny man, who's despite all of his positive media coverage, he's a racist who wants there to be an outright fascist Russia, as opposed to the current pretty reactionary government in Russia.
Yeah, it's really it's really terrible, that. Next on the list, overcoming the mental illnesses created by late stage capitalism. Take it away, Rainer Shea.
There are so many ways that living within late stage capitalism can drive you to mental illness, whether this mental illness involves paranoia, anxiety, depression, insecurity. I list a lot of them in my article. I go over some of my own experiences with being made to feel inadequate or like I'm not good enough. And for me, this has involved not insecurity over being unemployed or something like that, but feeling judged, feeling unfairly scrutinized by the forces of the social media mobs, and I think it's notable that both the psychological warfare agents of the U.S. intelligence and the toxic social media culture that we have right now, that they both operate based on the principle that, based on the belief that nobody who has made mistakes can grow from their mistakes, that nobody is allowed to be seen as an acceptable human being based on real or perceived missteps that they've made in the past. And this is how so-called cancel culture, despite the broadness of that term, can be weaponized by the forces of state psychological warfare. According to the Blue Leaks, this is exactly what the psychological warfare agents of the capitalist state seek to do. They seek to repeatedly conjure past events in somebody's life that can make them feel like they lack worth as a human being, to paint them as unstable, drug addicted, a danger to society, as somebody who lacks the ability to participate in a revolutionary movement. These are the kinds of cruel tactics that the state utilizes, and I think that one way to overcome these attempts to wear you down, to shake your confidence, to make you feel worthless as a human being, is to not have the kind of neurotic mindset that these psychological warfare agents want you to have, to not react when you're being denounced and shamed and told that you lack the ability to carry out the revolutionary tasks that will be required for you to fulfill your role as a contributor to the proletarian revolutionary movement. Because this is the outcome that the psychological warfare agents want to prevent any member of the underclass from carrying out. They want us to be dissuaded from the idea of participating in the revolutionary struggle, and they utilize the toxic elements of modern social media culture and the late stage capitalist consumer lifestyle obsession that this stems from, to try to make you susceptible to these toxic suggestions.
Yeah, this is really a problem that affects pretty much everyone in our society, and seemingly much more so than in most societies. And I think that's probably true, at least most societies today. They certainly have better ways to take care of mental illness than just pushing the mentally ill out into the streets and letting them sink or swim. It's really quite a big problem. Next on the list and final, also from Rainer Shea, the blackouts, resource deprivation, and martial law are our future.
By our future, I mean the future of working class and poor people within the United States, and also seemingly most among the those who would be considered the middle class, because it seemed like these blackouts in Texas have been pretty much a social equalizer. They've brought pretty much everybody except the very richest to the point where they lack electricity, and this can be a very powerful thing. This shared condition of being deprived of basic resources. This can potentially unite everyone who stands against the interests, who would stand to gain from a socialist revolution. Because when you look at those pictures in Austin of the metropolitan wealthy center of the city still being lit up while everybody else is living in darkness, you can get the sense that the rich are pretty isolated, and that if everyone else rose up, then a revolution could happen pretty easily. But the reality outside of these feverish, fantastical visions is a situation where the U.S. national security state plans to try to pacify the very large numbers of the population in the U.S. who will be impacted by these kinds of blackouts, natural disasters, etc., in the coming decades. According to a Pentagon report from 2019, most of the electrical grid in the U.S. is currently unprepared for the natural disasters that are going to hit them in the coming decades. So it's reasonable to expect that for most people in the U.S., blackouts or worse are going to become the norm. And to stop the population from rising up in revolution, the national security state plans to military occupy the most potentially unstable zones. They plan to carry out mass surveillance of multiple kinds, such as digital surveillance and sending in secret agents to these communities potentially. They plan to potentially cut off internet and cell phone access and get the local media to only show official U.S. military propaganda. They plan to impose the most repressive kinds of dictatorship imaginable within the occupied zones, while trying to isolate these communities from any resources that they could potentially gain to carry out a serious revolutionary effort. They want to wage war against the population as a collective, as a whole, with the hope of crushing this potential spark of revolutionary energy. And that's where the role of revolutionary socialist organizers will come in. We need to build local organizations that can help provide people with the mutual aid, first of all, that they'll require should they find themselves in a really seriously desperate situation. And we need to unite these communities around the eventual goal of overthrowing the capitalist state.
Okay, well put. I couldn't add anything to that. I agree 100%. It's what they are doing to us, and we need to wake the fuck up and start helping ourselves, because they will not help us. Okay, with that, I think we're done, unless you have anything to add.
No.
I think we're done for the night. Well done, as always. Thank you, Rainer. Thank each and every one of you who watch, who listen, and keep coming back, please. So until next week, I bid you a sweet adieu.